The first thing you notice is the light. It spills through your blinds in alternating waves of red and blue, washing over your living room wall like a silent alarm you never set. Then comes the sound. Low at first, a distant rumble of an idling engine, before the knock pounds through your front door like a fist against your chest. Bang, bang, bang. Police department, open the door. Your mouth goes dry. Your heart stutters. You glance at the clock on your microwave. 11:47 p.m. You weren't doing anything wrong. You were sitting on your couch, half watching a movie, scrolling your phone. But suddenly your palms are sweating, and your mind is racing through every tiny thing from the past week that could possibly explain why 3 armed officers are standing on your porch with flashlights sweeping your windows. You peek through the side curtain. 2 silhouettes, maybe 3. One of them is standing back near your driveway, and he isn't looking at your door. He's looking at the side of your house, at your electric meter, at the little digital box mounted near your gas line. You think, why is he staring at that? Here's what almost no one realizes until it's too late. That utility meter isn't just measuring your power usage. In the hands of a patient officer with a theory and no warrant, that little box becomes a surveillance device, and they don't need your permission to use it. Before I go any further, let me ask you something straight, and I want you to really sit with this question. Have the police ever shown up at your home unexpectedly, knocked on your door after dark, asked to come inside, or pressured you to talk when you were still in your pajamas, groggy, scared, or confused? Have they ever stood on your porch and made you feel like saying no would somehow make you look guilty? If that's happened to you, or if you've watched a neighbor go through it, drop your story in the comments. Because later in this article, I'm going to give you the exact phrases, the psychological traps, and the split-second mistakes that can turn a 5-minute doorstep conversation into a 3-hour search of your home. All because of what that meter outside your wall just told them. Let's slow down and talk about what's really happening when police show up at a private residence, why they're so interested in your utility meter, and how you can shut down a surveillance tactic that most lawyers won't even warn you about. Most people believe that their home is their castle. That's not just a saying, it's baked into the Fourth Amendment. The Supreme Court has been crystal clear for decades. Your home gets the highest level of constitutional protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Police cannot simply walk onto your property, poke around, and start gathering evidence without a warrant, probable cause, or at least one of a few narrow exceptions. That's the theory. Here's the reality. Cops show up at private homes every single night in this country without warrants. They knock, they wait, they listen, and they observe. From your driveway, your sidewalk, your porch, and yes, from wherever your utility meter is mounted. The legal doctrine that allows this is called the plain view doctrine, combined with something called the curtilage analysis. Curtilage is the private area immediately surrounding your home, your fenced backyard, your attached garage, your porch. Police generally can't just wander through your curtilage without a warrant. But here's the painful loophole. Your electric meter is almost always considered outside the curtilage, or at least in an area where officers have an implied license to approach. Think about that for a second. Every time a meter reader walks up to your house, that path becomes a recognized access route. And if a meter reader can lawfully stand there, guess who else can? A cop. No warrant required, no suspicion needed, just a pair of boots and a flashlight. So what exactly are they looking for when they stare at that little digital box? It depends on how sophisticated the department is. In smaller towns with older infrastructure, an officer might just be noting whether your meter is spinning unusually fast or slow. Why does that matter? Because dramatic spikes or drops in power usage can suggest indoor marijuana grows, illegal cryptocurrency mining, or even a vacant house being used for stash purposes. A meter running hot at 2 a.m. in a neighborhood where daytime usage is minimal, that's not probable cause on its own, but it's enough to start asking questions. And once they start asking questions at your door, the real game begins. But here's where things get genuinely unsettling. Many modern utility meters, especially the smart meters being rolled out across the country, transmit detailed usage data wirelessly to the power company. That data can include hour-by-hour, sometimes minute-by-minute breakdowns of your energy consumption. Police have increasingly tried to access this data without a warrant, arguing that because a third party, the utility company, already has the information, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. This argument has had mixed success in court, but here's the part that keeps me awake at night. By the time a judge rules on whether the warrant was required, the police have already used that data to establish probable cause for something else. The damage is done. The surveillance already happened. I want you to imagine a specific scenario, because this is where the psychological pressure becomes unbearable. It's 9:30 on a Tuesday night. You're getting your kid ready for bed. The doorbell rings. You open the door and two officers are standing there. One male, one female, both in uniform. The male officer smiles. "Evening, ma'am. Sorry to bother you so late. We're just following up on a report of suspicious activity in the area. Have you noticed anything unusual on your street in the last few days?" Your brain immediately starts searching for an answer. You want to be helpful. You don't want to seem rude or nervous. You say, "No, not really. Everything seems fine." The female officer nods, then glances past your shoulder into your living room. "Mind if we ask you a couple more questions? It'll only take a minute." You step aside slightly. Not an invitation, just a reflexive movement. But they notice. They always notice. The male officer takes half a step onto your doormat. "Is anyone else home tonight?" "Just my son. He's 7. He's getting ready for bed." "Okay, we appreciate your time. Just so you know, we've had some reports of unusual power fluctuations in this neighborhood. You haven't noticed any lights flickering or breakers tripping, have you?" Now your stomach tightens because you have noticed that. Your basement light has been acting weird for 2 weeks. You say so without thinking. The officer's tone shifts. It's subtle, but you catch it. Less friendly, more focused. "Which room was that in, ma'am?" This is the moment, right here. They haven't asked to come inside. They haven't accused you of anything, but they just extracted specific, actionable information from you about a potential problem inside your home. A problem that happens to align with a law enforcement theory about indoor grows or high-energy appliances. And you gave it to them voluntarily because you were scared, tired, and conditioned to respect authority. Here's what you should have done instead. And I'm telling you this not because I want you to be combative with police, but because I want you to survive an encounter without accidentally waiving your rights. When they ask about power fluctuations, you don't answer. You pause, you take a breath, and you say, "Officer, I'm happy to talk to you, but I'm not answering questions about my home right now. Is there a specific reason you're asking?" That pause, that 3 seconds of silence, feels like an hour. Your heart will pound. Your face might flush. The officer will likely repeat the question, maybe ask it a different way, maybe try to make you feel silly for not answering something so innocent. That's the psychological pressure tactic I mentioned earlier. They're testing your resolve. Most people crack on the second or third ask because they just want the conversation to end. Don't crack. Here's why that utility meter question is so dangerous. In a growing number of jurisdictions, police have begun using thermal imaging, either from handheld devices or from the air, to detect heat signatures coming from homes. The Supreme Court ruled in Kyllo versus United States, 2001, that using thermal imagers from outside a home without a warrant is generally unconstitutional because it reveals information about the interior that couldn't otherwise be known. But here's the workaround. If an officer standing next to your utility meter can feel unusual heat radiating from your exterior wall, or can see modifications to your meter, like bypass wires or tamper seals that look disturbed, that's considered plain view, no warrant needed. And if they see those things, they don't need your consent to call the power company and request your usage history. Some utility companies hand it over voluntarily. Others require a subpoena. But either way, you've lost control of your own data before you've even had a chance to say, "I don't consent to any searches." Let me tell you about a real case that didn't make national news, but should terrify every homeowner. A man in rural Oregon had his front door kicked in at 6 a.m. because a police officer driving past his house noticed that his electric meter had been replaced with a newer model, something the officer claimed was consistent with indoor marijuana cultivation. No warrant, no probable cause hearing, just an officer's suspicion and a no-knock entry authorized by a judge who only heard one side of the story. The man was growing tomatoes hydroponically in his basement. Lawful, legal. And his entire front door was splintered because a cop didn't like the look of his meter. So how do you stop cops from using your utility meter to spy on you? You have to think like they do. You have to understand the legal gray zones before they arrive at your door. First, understand what the meter actually reveals. A standard analog meter shows total cumulative usage. A smart meter shows time-stamped usage patterns. Neither one tells an officer what specific appliance is running. But here's the dirty secret of police surveillance. They don't need certainty. They need suspicion. And suspicion is incredibly easy to manufacture from incomplete data. A spike at 3 a.m. could be a grow light. It could also be a medical device, a heater for a reptile tank, a bread maker, or a teenager gaming on a high-end PC. The officer doesn't know, but they don't need to know. They just need enough to ask a judge for a warrant, and most judges will sign anything that smells even faintly of drugs. Second, you need to control physical access to your meter. I'm not suggesting you build a fortress around it. That could backfire and look like evidence of tampering. But you can plant thorny bushes near the access path. You can install motion-activated lights. You can position a visible security camera pointing directly at the meter. None of these things are illegal. What they do is force an officer to think twice about lingering near your meter for 10 minutes while writing notes. Surveillance thrives on invisibility. Make yourself visible. Third, know exactly what to say when police show up asking about your power usage. Practice this sentence until you can say it without stammering. I don't mean to be difficult, but I don't consent to any searches of my home or my property, and I'd like to speak with an attorney before answering any questions about my utilities. That sentence is a silver bullet. It shuts down the consent angle completely. And here's something most people don't realize. Once you invoke your right to remain silent or your right to an attorney, good officers will stop questioning you immediately. Bad officers might try to keep talking, but you don't have to listen. You can close the door. You don't need their permission to end the conversation. I know that sounds extreme. I know you were raised to be polite. I know the thought of closing a door in a police officer's face makes your stomach turn. But let me ask you something. Would you rather feel rude for 30 seconds or feel handcuffed for 3 hours while officers tear through your closets because you said, "Sure, come in," when you were half asleep and scared? The most dangerous phrase in American home police encounters is, "No problem, come on in." It's not a warrant. It's not a legal finding. It's just a terrified citizen trying to be agreeable. And it waives your Fourth Amendment rights faster than anything else. Now let's talk about the meter itself. If you're truly concerned about law enforcement using your usage data against you, you have options that go beyond doorstep conversations. Some privacy advocates have successfully requested that their utility company disable the wireless transmission feature on their smart meters. The utility will hate this. They'll tell you it's impossible. It's not. You may have to pay a fee, you may have to sign waivers, but you can often revert to a non-transmitting meter that requires physical reading. That doesn't stop a cop from looking at it, but it stops the power company from handing over detailed usage logs without your knowledge. You can also contact your state's Public Utilities Commission and ask about data retention policies. In some states, utility companies are required to purge detailed usage data after a certain period. In others, they keep it for years and hand it over to any law enforcement agency that asks politely. Knowing your state's rules gives you leverage. But here's the bigger picture, and I want you to feel this in your bones. Police use utility meters as surveillance tools because it's easy, it's low cost, and it almost never triggers a legal challenge. Most people never even know it happened. They just wake up one morning to a search warrant affidavit that references anomalous power consumption patterns as one of the justifications for invading their home. By the time you read that affidavit, it's too late to object. The surveillance already occurred. The data is already in the warrant. Your only recourse is to fight the search in court months later, after your life has been turned upside down. That's not justice. That's a loophole dressed up in blue. I'm not anti-police. I believe officers have dangerous jobs and that many of them genuinely want to protect their communities. But I also believe that the Constitution exists precisely for moments when the government's interest in investigating conflicts with a citizen's interest in privacy. That conflict is happening right now, in neighborhoods across the country, every single night. And the only thing standing between you and a warrantless surveillance operation built around your electric meter is your own knowledge, your own calm, and your own willingness to say no when every instinct is screaming at you to say yes. So here's my challenge to you. Tonight, before you go to bed, walk outside to where your utility meter is mounted. Stand there for 60 seconds. Look at what the officer would see. Look at what's visible from the street. Look at whether your meter is locked, whether there are obvious signs of tampering, whether the area is well lit. Then ask yourself, if a cop stood right here at midnight, what story would they tell themselves about my home based on what they can see and what they can measure? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, change something. Trim a bush, add a light, point a camera. Practice the sentences that protect your rights. And never, ever forget that the safest answer to "can we come in?" is a polite, firm, unapologetic no. Because once they're past your threshold, that little metal box on the side of your house isn't the surveillance device anymore. You are.